I was sitting by the floor-to-ceiling window of my downtown apartment, the late afternoon sun spilling over the polished oak floors, warming the silk blouse I had carefully chosen for the day. The hum of the city below was a constant reminder that life kept moving, whether we noticed it or not. My phone buzzed insistently on the marble countertop, dragging me out of my thoughts. I picked it up and saw his name, Ethan. My nephew. The message was short. Aunt Rachel, you're not welcome at my graduation. I leaned back in my leather chair, feeling the weight of those words settle like a stone in my chest. Ethan, at 21, was barely old enough to realize the sting of rejection, yet here he was, delivering it with the unfiltered confidence of youth. My first instinct was hurt, sure, but beneath that, there was a flicker of irony. Because while he had grown in his bubble of entitlement, I had been quietly building a life that didn't need anyone's approval. My reflection in the window caught me, a woman in control, a woman they all underestimated. Yet, in that quiet moment, I allowed myself the tiniest crack of vulnerability. I set the phone down and poured a cup of coffee, the aroma grounding me. I could hear the faint click of the elevator below, the chatter of neighbors who had no idea what storms brewed behind closed doors. And as I sipped, I realized that this invitation, or non-invitation, wasn't just a message. It was a challenge. I remember the summer I turned 22 like it was yesterday. The air was heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint hint of sunscreen from the kids running down the street. I had just returned from my first big internship, a position I had fought tooth and nail to secure, only to be greeted at the door by my mother's sigh and Ethan's smug grin. "You're still here?" he asked, leaning against the doorway like I was an intruder in my own home. "I don't get why you even try. Nothing ever changes for you." I felt my chest tighten, a lump forming in my throat as I clutched the small gift my grandmother had handed me that morning, a delicate silver bracelet, engraved with the words, "Strength is quiet, but it carries you far." She had pressed it into my hand with a knowing smile. "Wear this when the world tries to tell you who you are," she had whispered. The words stung more than the insult itself. I had always been the one who picked up the pieces, who helped pay bills, who stayed late to make sure everything ran smoothly, only to be dismissed by the people who mattered most. My hands trembled as I poured myself a glass of water, my mind racing with all the times I had swallowed my pride, pretending their words didn't hurt. That day, I made a choice. I would no longer wait for validation from those who didn't see me. I packed a small suitcase, kissed my mother lightly on the cheek without a word, and stepped out into the bright, intimidating world that awaited me. The bracelet glinted in the sun as I fastened it around my wrist, a silent promise that I would define my own worth. Walking down the city streets, I could feel every gaze, every whisper in the crowd, as though the world itself was challenging me. And I welcomed it, because for the first time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was creating the life I deserved. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but I knew that one day, the very people who had doubted me would be forced to see me, not as the girl they dismissed, but as the woman I was becoming. The first few months were brutal. I moved into a modest studio apartment in the city, its cracked tiles and peeling paint a far cry from the home I had left behind. I worked odd jobs at first, barista shifts that left my feet aching, receptionist duties that tested my patience, but I clung to that silver bracelet on my wrist like a talisman. Every time I felt doubt creeping in, I touched it and reminded myself, strength is quiet, but it carries you far. Then I met Claire. She was a seasoned graphic designer running a boutique agency, known in the industry for her sharp eye and sharp tongue. I had nervously shown her some of my freelance work, expecting polite dismissal. Instead, she leaned back, studying my designs with an intensity that made my heart race. "You have potential," she said simply. "Raw, but real. I'll take a chance on you." That chance changed everything. Claire became my mentor, guiding me through late nights of design revisions, endless client calls, and the subtle politics of a field dominated by people who assumed women couldn't lead. I remember nights when I'd collapse onto the threadbare couch, my laptop still open, heart pounding from fear that I wasn't enough. Yet, with every small win, A campaign successfully launched, a client praising my work. I felt a quiet power growing inside me. Financial independence didn't happen overnight. I kept careful track of every dollar, celebrated every small milestone, and avoided boasting to anyone back home. Social media updates were minimal, vague, never revealing the truth of the life I was building. I didn't need their approval. I only needed proof to myself that I could do it. My first major breakthrough came unexpectedly. A boutique tech startup wanted a complete rebrand, and Claire pushed me to lead the project. I remember pacing the tiny conference room, heart hammering as I presented my vision. When the CEO nodded and smiled, saying, "This is exactly what we need," I felt a surge of pride I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. It wasn't just a professional victory. It was validation that I was capable of more than anyone at home had ever imagined. Over the next few years, I built my own clientele, gradually establishing a reputation that spread quietly but powerfully. I rented a small office, filled it with art that inspired me, and invested in myself in ways my younger self could barely have dreamed of. I kept my family at arm's length, not out of bitterness, but because their judgments no longer mattered. My life was mine. And yet, every time I scrolled past their posts on social media, every time Ethan tagged a boastful photo with his friends, I felt a flicker of that old hurt. It wasn't anger that I carried, it was anticipation. Because one day, the truth of my success would arrive quietly, but unavoidably, in a way that left no room for doubt. The invitation arrived in the mail a week before Ethan's graduation. I had to read it twice to make sure my eyes weren't deceiving me. A formal card, glossy and stiff, addressed to Rachel Morgan. My chest tightened, a mixture of curiosity and amusement bubbling under the surface. Ethan clearly thought this was a courtesy, expecting me to decline, or worse, to feel unwelcome. I decided to accept, not out of obligation, but because I had a plan. I wanted them to see, to really see. The day of the ceremony, I arrived early, slipping past the throngs of parents and students with a quiet confidence. My tailored navy suit fit perfectly, a subtle declaration of the woman I had become. Claire had reminded me to walk with my head held high. That presence often spoke louder than words. I smiled faintly, feeling the familiar weight of my bracelet against my wrist. Ethan spotted me almost immediately. His eyes widened, and for a brief second, the smugness that had colored our last encounters faltered. "You came," he muttered, as if surprised I could navigate the crowd without tripping over my own insecurities. But the real moment wasn't the applause from strangers or the polite nods from distant relatives. It was the reaction when they arrived at my office a few days later. I had invited my mother and Ethan under the guise of showing them some personal work, something innocuous. They stepped into the space, and for the first time, I let them take it all in. Expensive abstract paintings lined the walls, each one chosen to spark creativity. Sunlight spilled across sleek furniture and polished floors, highlighting awards and framed letters of recognition. My desk gleamed with minimal clutter, but the subtle touches, a vase of fresh lilies, a stack of carefully curated books, spoke volumes about my taste and the life I had built. I let them linger in silence. I could hear the shuffle of their feet, the quick intake of breaths. And then I spoke. "I know you all thought I was struggling, that I was failing," I said softly, letting the words roll off my tongue like silk. "But I've been building a life that's mine, a career that I love, and success that no one can take from me." Their eyes darted from the office to the awards, to the ledger showing recent client contracts and profits. My mother's lips parted, words caught somewhere between pride and disbelief. Ethan's face went pale. For the first time, his arrogance faltered. I smiled. "I own my agency. I lead teams. I make decisions that affect hundreds of people's lives. And yes," I added, letting the irony sink in, "I did it without needing anyone to believe in me or welcome me." Silence followed. I didn't rush to fill it. I let them feel the weight of my presence, the truth of my accomplishments, the quiet power of someone who had transformed pain into strength. It was the moment I had envisioned, the one where their assumptions about me shattered quietly, beautifully and completely. And in that silence, I realized something. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was recognition. Recognition that I had grown, endured, and thrived on my own terms. After the initial shock wore off, the room felt heavy with unspoken tension. My mother fidgeted with the hem of her blouse, and Ethan avoided meeting my eyes, his earlier arrogance replaced with something I couldn't quite name, perhaps guilt, perhaps awe. I stood by my desk, calm, composed, but every inch of me thrummed with quiet power. "I'm willing to help," I said, letting the words hang in the air, but only on specific terms. No one gets a free pass. My voice was soft, yet firm, leaving no room for debate. "First, Ethan, you need to stop thinking the world owes you something because it doesn't. You need to take responsibility for your own actions, your own education. I'll support your next steps, but only if you commit to applying yourself honestly, no shortcuts, no excuses." His jaw tightened, but I could see the flicker of understanding in his eyes. To my mother, I said, "You have to stop enabling and criticizing in the same breath. You need to learn to respect boundaries, not just mine, but everyone around you. I'll provide guidance for the things that matter, but I will not be treated like a failure or a scapegoat again." Then I addressed the rest of the family quietly, explaining that financial help, advice, or any kind of support from me would come only with accountability and effort. I wanted them to grow, not rely on my achievements as a safety net. I could feel their surprise and hesitation, but also the faint pulse of hope. This wasn't punishment, it was a chance to change. I let each of them process the conditions, observing the subtle shifts in body language. Ethan straightened, as if realizing for the first time that his actions had consequences. My mother's eyes softened, a tear threatening to escape before she blinked it away. For the first time, I felt that my role in their lives had changed, not as the girl they had dismissed, but as the woman who had earned the right to set the terms. The silver bracelet glinted on my wrist, a reminder of every step that had led me here, the nights of struggle, the mentors who believed, the small victories that compounded into undeniable success. I had chosen compassion, yes, but only because it was paired with clarity and strength. I was no longer reacting to old wounds. I was directing the narrative. By the end of the conversation, I saw a subtle transformation. They weren't perfect, and I knew change wouldn't happen overnight. But they understood one thing clearly. I had the power now. The control wasn't about punishment. It was about guiding them toward their own potential, without letting them drag me back into patterns that had once confined me. And as I watched them leave that evening, I realized the most powerful shift had already occurred. I wasn't seeking their approval anymore. I was offering them the possibility of growth, but only if they were willing to meet me on my terms. And that was exactly where I wanted to be. Weeks passed after the confrontation, and change began to ripple quietly, but unmistakably. Ethan enrolled in community courses, approaching them with an intensity one hadn't seen before, his earlier entitlement replaced by a tentative curiosity. My mother, too, began to respect boundaries, asking questions instead of dictating, listening instead of judging. It wasn't perfection, change never is, but it was progress, and that was enough. I sat in my office one late evening, the city lights stretching like ribbons outside my window. The bracelet my grandmother had given me caught the reflection of the lamp, and I held it in my hand for a long moment. How far I had come, from a young woman dismissed at home to someone who had built a life that was both independent and unapologetically hers. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ethan, who had thought he could deny me a place at his graduation, was now learning lessons about humility, responsibility, and effort. My own journey had shown me that success wasn't just wealth or recognition. It was the quiet confidence of knowing your worth, even when others fail to see it. I reflected on the years of struggle, the late nights fueled by coffee and determination, the mentors who believed in me when no one else did. Each challenge had been a stepping stone, each setback a lesson in resilience. And now, watching the people I cared for begin to grow alongside me, I felt a calm satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge. The bracelet rested on my wrist as I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. My grandmother's words echoed softly. Strength is quiet, but it carries you far. I realized that strength wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in rising, in creating, in holding firm to my values and my life. I looked at the city's skyline once more, the hum of life below reminding me of all that was possible. My family was learning to meet me in this new space, to honor the boundaries I had set. And I, in turn, was learning that power and compassion could coexist, that independence didn't mean isolation, and that grace could be as fierce as it was gentle. As I stood and adjusted my blazer, ready for the next chapter, I whispered to myself, a quiet affirmation that carried through the room. I am enough. I always have been. Bottom of form.